Hello friends, my name is Aisling and you are very welcome here. I'm here to talk about books and today's video is going to be my September wrap up. So today is actually September 29th, it's a Friday. I'm done, I've given up on September. I have the blinds pretty much closed, it's a sunny day, I'm tired. I'm signing out, so I'm doing my wrap up today. I'm not going to finish another book tomorrow. So here we are, we'll get going. So last month I read 20 books, which is not the norm for me. Just a lot of different things came together and I was sick for a while, so I just ended up reading a lot. I read a lot of short books as well though. This month, not quite as successful. I have finished 6 books in September. It was all going so well. The first book that I read was amazing and then I had such a bad book hangover after it. Oh my god, I just literally couldn't read. So I got through some stuff. I will explain. I'll talk about the first book I read, but I'll talk about that last. I'll get cracking on the other books that I did manage to finish. So the first one, or technically second, but the first one I'm going to speak about was A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. So this is the first book in the Monk and Robot series. It's really short. I think that's why I managed to finish it. Nothing again against the book, but that book hangover was absolutely in full force at this point. So we follow a tea monk who was originally a monk in a monastery, but increasingly this tea monk felt the pull for like further pastures to kind of get out and about and to do things. So what was lovely actually is our monk, our main character, is referred to as sibling rather than brother or sister, so there's great non-binary representation in this book, which I really liked. So anyway, this monk decides that they want to be a tea monk. So what a tea monk is basically a monk who travels around with a cart with like lots of different types of teas and then some cozy things, so that when they stop, people can kind of pull up a cushion at the table and have a chat to the monk about how they've been feeling. So it's kind of like this lovely weird tea counselling service. And so this is what our monk heads off to do. So in this universe, centuries beforehand, essentially robots became sentient and decided, nah, I've had enough. So they put down their tools and they disappear into the wilderness, never to be seen again. All grand, no bother. Our monk is toddling along anyway, decides, hey, I want to go to this particular place, so goes off path a little bit, and the life of our tea monk is essentially upended when a robot shows up, and this robot is desperate to find out answers to the question, what do people need? Now obviously, if you ask me what I need at any given time, it will change, and it will change from person to person as well. So I don't think there's any one universal human need. There's obviously a lot of things that we all need, shelter, food, so on and so forth. I really enjoyed it. It also speaks about the impact of humans on nature as well. I really liked that facet of it. It's kind of a little bit tongue-in-cheek in places. It's really easy to read. It's really well written. It's kind of focused around like in a world where people have everything that they want. Does having more even matter? Does it make a difference? It's about purpose, it's about identity, nature, and even productivity to some point. Like, it's not the best book I ever read, but there was something quite cozy about it. It was very readable, very quick. I'm going to read the second one, so that's an endorsement in and of itself. We were going so well, and then I got an offer on Audible to basically pay £1 a month for 3 months. So my first month, my first credit, I was like, I'm kind of in the mood for like maybe some kind of romantasy or something. I'm definitely much more fantasy than romance myself, so there is a little bit of a sticky kind of area there where we travel a little bit too far into romance, and maybe this next one was that way for me. So the next one then, so I listened to The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent, obviously on audio because I just said I listened to it, right? So we follow Aurea, and Aurea is a human girl and she's living in this world where basically everything is out to get her. It's very deadly, very dangerous for her. So when she was a young girl, she was found by the Nightborn vampire king. So yes, this book is about vampires, and for some reason he decides to take her in and adopt her as his own rather than just killing her on the spot. I may have missed why that was, because I did find myself kind of phasing out a little bit or a lot reading this, which isn't that unusual for me with audiobooks. That's why I don't read so much using audio. I just can't pay attention. And then I come back and I'm like, wait, what? This Nightborn vampire king raised and trained her to become a fighter so that she could protect herself. And then she decides to enter what's called the Kajari. And the Kajari is basically like a tournament. And it's kind of a tournament to the death. Very reminiscent of Chloe Gong's Immortal Longings that I just read last month, or the year before, or the month before even. This Kajari is kind of her only prospect of becoming more than prey, and it's a tournament run by the goddess of death herself, and your objective is to survive. Everybody's going to die except for like one person. I actually can't really remember what the point of doing all that was, apart from surviving, but why would you put yourself in that situation in the first place? I actually don't know, and I'm sure it was mentioned in the book, but it just didn't really hold my interest. So anyway, she meets a vampire. His name is Wherein. He is a competitor and he is a ruthless killer and probably her biggest competition in the whole thing. Somehow the two of them end up drawn together as allies, and it's not long before we realise that he is the main kind of romantic interest. I did feel a bit detached from this one. I wasn't really into the characters or the setting so much. I liked that it was a book about vampires, but it went a little bit elsewhere to where maybe vampire-y books might normally go. I guess there's not much you can do with a vampire story, maybe. I don't know. It just wasn't really my cup of tea. Now, I did give it 3 stars, but I would say that was probably a low 3 stars. I know that this book is like a TikTok darling and it is well loved, but it just, I don't think was for me. It was much heavier on the romance than the fantasy, I think. The world building, I don't know if it was not great or again if I just wasn't paying all the best attention. Unfortunately, this one just didn't really do it for me. I decided to read it based on the fact that I actually really enjoyed Fourth Wing last month. You see them both kind of tied together a little bit in the fact that they just blew up so much and they're such fantasy, romancy kind of books, but the two are very different, and for some reason I forgave so much with Fourth Wing, but I just wasn't able to forgive that much with The Serpent and the Wings of Night. Now look, I did listen to it on audio, so maybe that wasn't a fair chance given my history with audiobooks, but look, it is what it is. Some people are going to love it, it just wasn't for me. And then we have The Carrying by Ada Limon. So Ada Limon is historically one of my favourite poets. I really love her work. I've banged on about her enough. So this is, I believe, her latest collection. 2022, yeah, it's her latest collection. And historically, I have loved Ada Limon's poetry. I just get this experience when I read her poetry. Obviously not every one of her poems hits for me, but often I love that she writes about the body, about illness, about her relationships. This book, a lot of the poems in here are really heavily nature focused, and they weren't bad, but they just weren't what I was expecting. Maybe there were some really good ones in here, don't get me wrong, but something about it didn't hit me the way that some of her other collections have. There was one poem in here, I don't know if I can find it now. That's it, I have it. So it was called A Good Story, and there was something about this that I really liked. I'm actually just going to read you the whole thing because screw it, we're a poetry channel over here. So it's called, as I said, A Good Story. Some days, dishes piled in the sink, books littering the coffee table are harder than others. Today, my head is packed with cockroaches, dizziness, and everywhere it hurts. Venom in the jaw, behind the eyes, between the blades. Still, the dog is snoring on my right, the cat on my left. Outside, all those red buds are just getting good. I tell a friend, the body is so body, and she nods. I used to like the darkest stories, the bleak snippets someone would toss out about just how bad it could get. My stepfather told me a story about when he lived on the streets as a kid. How he'd some nights sleep under the grill at a fast food restaurant until both he and his buddy got fired. I used to like that story for some reason. Something in me that believed in overcoming. But right now, all I want is a story about human kindness. The way once, when I couldn't stop crying because I was 15 and heartbroken, he came in and made me eat a small pizza he cut up into tiny bites until the tears stopped. Maybe I was just hungry, I said. And he nodded, holding out the last piece. there's something about that one that really hit me quite hard the first time that I read it. Now, the first time that I read it was not in this collection. I just happened to come across it on an Instagram post. There's also a poem in here, and one of the lines in it, I'm really paraphrasing here, and it says something along the lines of, I will never be a mother. And me personally, same goes. I will never be a mother. I'm child free by choice, thankfully, because I had decided this before kind of all my health stuff kicked off, and I have genetic disease I wouldn't like to pass on to a child. I know we're getting a bit eugenicsy, but that's my personal thing there, and just physically I wouldn't be able for it, to be honest, as things are. Getting a bit deep here, I guess, but I can speak about it quite casually. I don't want to be a mother, never have, but this one kind of bit of this poem anyway, she says, I will never be a mother, and it just kind of hit me. I was like, fuck, I never will be a mother. So that was really weird. You know, sometimes you know something like your whole life, but yet when you hear it back, you're like, wow, that's pretty big. But yeah, so I had very mixed feelings about this one. It was really good. It just wasn't what I expected it to be, maybe. I probably preferred her other collections a little bit more. Okay, so I had finished my audiobook then of The Serpent and the Wings of Night, and I wanted to find another audiobook. I listened to Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel a couple months ago, didn't know what to expect. Loved it. I know quite a few people personally that have loved Sea of Tranquility, and I saw it was available on my library app, so I decided to listen to it. So it's quite a short novel, but what it lacks in length, I feel like it really makes up for with the punch that it packs. We start out in Vancouver in 1912 and end up on a dark colony on the moon 500 years later. Now that makes it sound like it's perfectly chronological. It kind of is, but it's not. I'm just making it sound really confusing. A lot of the same themes that were in Station 11 were covered in Sea of Tranquility as well. So there was pandemics, there was this idea of performance, there was a composer in it. I don't want to say too much because obviously I don't want to spoil it, but I could see that they were kind of linked closely. They're not in the same universe, but you could tell that it was written by the same author. No complaints here. I absolutely loved it. Loved Sea of Tranquility as well, in case you were wondering. So it's told in shifting timelines. This novel is essentially a novel about time travel. I hope that's not a spoiler. It is complex, but yet I found it easy to follow, and it wraps up quite nicely. It circles back in on itself. So I love how this author manages to include so many different POVs into their work in so few pages, without the characters seeming flat, without the world seeming like not well built, and without the plot becoming confusing. I really enjoyed it. I don't want to say too much about it. Again, it's one of these books, it's not going to be for everybody. It's a sci-fi book, but it's very literary. I would say that if you like literary books, you would probably like this, but if you're big into sci-fi, it might not actually be your thing. Although I don't know, I'm not a sci-fi girly, I can't say, but I thought it was really good, really well written, and I will definitely get on to more Emily St. John Mandel. So yeah, definitely recommend that one. And then I was in Dublin last week. I went to see my favourite band, The National, with my partner. I did bring my camera to vlog that, by the way, and when I was in the train station, before we left, I went to turn on my camera and my camera wouldn't turn on. So I spent all that trip worrying that I'd broken my camera, but as it turns out my charger wasn't plugged in when I came home and I saw, so all was well. Didn't get to vlog it, oh well. But while we were there in Hodges Vegas, I picked up A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. So V.E. Schwab has, I was about to say, a new album, a new book coming out this month called The Fragile Threads of Power. Actually, I think it's out already. I was just gonna jump in right there, but I have heard that it is set in the same world as this trilogy, and it would probably be best for me to go back and read this trilogy first. So while I was in Dublin, I picked up A Darker Shade of Magic. I'm really glad that I did. So I read The Secret Life of Addie LaRue a couple of years ago maybe, and I thought it was okay. I really liked V.E. Schwab's style of writing, but I think the plot just didn't do it for me, and because that book is so hyped, I was expecting a lot more. It's not that I didn't enjoy it, I just didn't really rate it as highly as maybe other people. So I was a little bit like, oh, I don't know, more V.E. Schwab might just not be for me, but I am happy to say that I really enjoyed this book. So this is set in a world where there are in fact at least 3, if not 4 parallel worlds. So it's set in London, and we have Grey London, which is like what I imagine to be like our London. No magic, everything's pretty standard. So one of our main characters comes from Grey London, and then we have Red London, where everything's tinted a little bit red. There's a lot more magic. Things are quite different to Grey London, but things feel quite safe as well. Then there's White London, and White London is quite dangerous. Doesn't sound like a nice place to be. And then once upon a time there was a Black London, and Black London was also magical, just like Red London and White London. But they started to use, I guess, black magic, and this dark magic kind of overtook everything and they had to shut it off. So we don't really know if it still exists or not. We follow Lila from Grey London, and she's getting by as a thief on the streets, and she dresses as a man kind of to keep herself safer and just as a disguise. And then we have Kel, who is from Red London. Kel is not royalty, but he was basically taken in by the king and queen and considers their son, the prince, to be his brother. He has had quite a privileged upbringing, and Kel travels between 3 of the Londons, so Grey, Red and White, and illegally moves letters back and forth, because travel back and forth isn't really possible. It's not really the done thing, and moving trinkets over and back is illegal, but Kel does it anyway, I guess for the fun of it. I don't really know, but Kel finds himself caught up in a conspiracy whereby he is asked to deliver something, and when he goes to deliver this to the other world, he realizes that it's been a bit of a setup and there's people there to kill him, but he gets away. When he realizes this, he winds up kind of bumping into and teaming up with Lila in an effort to return this package back to where it belongs, and to possibly even destroy it so that the remaining 3 Londons don't end up ruined like Black London. I hope I've explained that. I feel like I've said a lot of words and I don't really know what came out, but fingers crossed. That's what you're here for, right? I found this book to be really atmospheric. It's obviously a fantasy novel. There's a lot of magic in it, but it's almost sort of like Dickensian, kind of historical fiction set in London, like a magical Dickens, but not Dickensian, because I haven't had the best of experience with Dickens books. Sorry. I really loved the characters, the pacing was really good, the plot was good, it was fast paced, it kept moving, there were plenty twists and turns, lots of tension, lots of intrigue. Usually when I start a series, I don't read the next book in the series for ages, but if I had had the second book in my hand when I finished this, I would have immediately gone into it. So I guess again that's a ringing endorsement coming from me. I'm going to do an honourable mention because there's a book that I haven't finished reading but that I did start in September. So as I said, the first book that I read in September put me into an awful reading slump just because I was so like enamored with it. I just couldn't read anything since because nothing was ever going to get at me as much. But the next book that I picked up after reading that book was the Windup Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. I'm not actually finished it, but I'm about halfway through, if not a little bit more. This was the wrong book to pick up at the time, because if you've read any Murakami, you kind of know that there's a sense of detachment and loneliness in his books. I don't know if anybody else gets that, but that's what I get. Like, I've read a few of his books now and I feel like there is a specific loneliness, and the plot tends to be quite subdued, quite bizarre. I enjoy it while I'm reading it, but I don't feel the need to pick it back up when I've put it down. So I did decide to kind of put it aside. I am still reading it. I haven't DNF'd it, but it's not like my main priority. I will probably finish this before Christmas, hopefully. I'm not in any hurry for it. I really want to finish it because it's not that it's a bad book. It's very typical Murakami. You know, there's stuff with women, just yeah, and there are some things that, like, I don't know, but so far I was liking it but not enjoying it because it just wasn't what I wanted to read at the time. So I will get back around to it, and I just said I'd mention it because I did read like this much, but then I just got tired, okay? I just got tired. I have mentioned that the first book that I read this month really put me into quite the slump. If you are somebody who's watching this channel, you are probably into books and into reading and like to consume media to do with books and to do with reading and storytelling. So this book, I'm sure you have heard of it. It's been on my shelf for a really long time. It was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Here's where, by going really right, things went really wrong for me reading in September. So the first book in September that I read was A Little Life. You have heard of this book as being really traumatic, really long, a really difficult read. There's been a lot of controversy about it, but firstly let's just talk about the plot and what's going on. So we follow a group of 4 male friends living in New York. So most of the book is set in New York, and they meet in college and they have this really great friendship, and we follow them through the next few decades of their lives. The sense of place in this makes it feel almost as though New York is another character. I've never been to New York, but I felt almost like some of these places were recognizable to me. I don't know. It is told from many different POVs, not just these 4 boys, but also their friends, people around them. You would think that that would get confusing, but no, it's a story that feels incredibly postmodern in the way that Yanagihara kind of tells stories within stories and moves seamlessly through timelines, so things kind of jump back and forth. There's stories told within, so we could be in, say, current day, but we're talking about somebody's childhood, but yet it's being told from the perspective of current day, so the story kind of comes in hindsight. There's a lot of this, but it just reads really easily, like it reads really well. It's really immersive. It's an entirely character driven novel, so if you're mostly a plot driven person, it's not going to be for you. It's not going to sustain you for 700 pages or whatever it is. But for me, who loves character driven novels, I was enamored with the plot, even though it's mostly kind of no plot. Well, there is a little bit, but you know, it's not super plot driven. I was almost foaming at the mouth to get into bed to read this every night to see where it was going to go. So I must mention, like, as I'm sure you've heard, this book is incredibly traumatic. The trigger warnings are coming out my elbows. There's not the least of which were things like abuse and self-harm and so on. I would advise you to look up trigger warnings if you're somebody that finds yourself triggered by certain situations, because chances are it might be in this book. I know that a lot of people have said that this book is absolutely nothing but trauma porn, and while I do see this criticism, I personally feel as though it was so much more than that. Yanagihara set out to write a story about a person or about a life whereby somebody starts out in a really difficult situation, and a lot of the stories that we read, they have happy endings or things resolve or, you know, things get better. But this novel is about 4 friends, but it's kind of centrally about this one character. And this one character has had such a traumatic childhood, such a traumatic teendom, such a traumatic adult life, has had a really tough time, and it just doesn't end. Like, it just keeps going. And I have read that the publishers wanted Yanagihara to actually bring back some of the more difficult scenes in this, to remove some of the more difficult things, but the author wanted to go there, wanted to write a story that was difficult, that maybe there may have been no retribution for this character, because sometimes that's how life is. Sometimes things are just shit. If that's not the kind of story that you want to read, do not read this book. Do not read this book. So another criticism of this author's writing as well is that she writes stories from the perspective of queer men quite a bit, and she is not a queer man herself. So there is obviously this argument, and something that's very important is that the right people get to tell their own stories, and she is not telling her own story in this. Now, what I will say is that I see that argument as well, and usually I'm all for telling own stories, but I loved this story, and I feel like if Yanagihara hadn't told it or hadn't written it, nobody else would have. And I think it really deserves to exist. I think it's had such a profound effect on so many people, sometimes not in a good way, but a lot of the time really positive, in spite of it being a really difficult read. In case it wasn't obvious, I have such a deep love for this book. I loved it. I cannot recall having a reading experience ever like I had when I read this one. I read To Paradise by the same author last year, and I really loved it, but it doesn't have a patch on what this book is, in my opinion. I just felt completely and utterly immersed In it, I felt just totally enthralled by it. I doubt that I've ever cried so much reading a book. And I'm a crier, like when something's sad I will cry. Like, that's how my body works. It's all good. One night my pillow was so wet from my tears that I actually literally had to switch pillows because it was just soaking. I was like, it was ridiculous. I don't necessarily enjoy that kind of torture, but there was something just so beautifully profound about this book. It's difficult, like it's such a difficult read. Don't get me wrong when I say that I loved it, like it's such a difficult read. I loved it, but I don't know if I can say that I enjoyed it, but I did enjoy it. I don't know, it's not an enjoyable read, but I don't know, you get what I'm trying to say. It's really sad, but it's really good. If you're here a while, you'll likely have noticed that I just don't give out 5 stars very often. I think in the past 5 years, I've maybe given 12 books 5 stars, including this one. So yeah, I gave it 5 stars. There's no way I couldn't have given this book 5 stars. When I rate a book, it's literally like all vibes. I don't have a system. There's nothing technical about it. It's about the experience that I had when I read a book. So sure, plot, setting, character, pacing, so on and so forth, they're really important, but sometimes all of those things either don't matter or they come together in such a way that like it transcends the things that we've read before. And I really don't think we should be giving a book 5 stars unless it's absolutely perfect. But when I say absolutely perfect, I don't mean like technically perfect, or I just mean that it gave you that perfect reading experience that you're after at that given time. To put it lightly, this book affected me. And it was such an experience. Like I literally haven't had an experience like this reading a book ever. It's not my favorite book I've ever read, but it's pretty damn close. The writing is pristine. I loved the storytelling. Some of these characters will sit with me probably for the rest of my life. There was so much kindness in it. There was so much awfulness in it as well, but isn't that life? Like, don't things come and go and ebb and flow? And I don't know, like, so it's, as I said, it's particularly about this one person really, and sometimes things are just really fucking shit, like, and that's just how it is. And I've read the criticisms about this book, I've seen them, I've heard them, and I get them, I understand them, but somehow, all of that aside, I still loved it. I read it about 3 weeks ago and I just literally still can't stop thinking about it. I'm considering getting a tattoo, no time soon, but it's like knocking around in my head now. I had a bit of a week reading this book. Don't read it if it sounds like it's not your thing, because if it sounds like it's not your thing, it's not going to be your thing. I have babbled on enough about this book. I've babbled on enough in general, so I'm going to leave it there. I'm really looking forward to getting into my October reads, which you will have seen in my TBR last week. Have you read any of these books? What do you think? Do you agree about my thoughts on A Little Life, or were you one of the many 1-star folks who would have given it less stars if they could have? I get where you're coming from, don't worry. Was September a good reading month for you? Let me know in the comments, and if you would like to leave me a comment and don't know what kind of comment you would like to leave, just leave me a little stack of books. Little emoji. Please take care of yourself. Please mind yourself. Please mind each other. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for being here. Bye bye.